Welcome back to the Pregnancy Pointers podcast. Today we will be talking about our recently released postpartum hemorrhage brochure. We will be discussing four main topics today with three guest researchers, Professor Bruno, Damo, and Thind. But first, let's set some groundwork on what we're going to be talking about today by answering some of your questions. A question by Caesarean asks, what is postpartum hemorrhage? Postpartum hemorrhage, or PPH, simply means heavy bleeding after birth. It's rare, but when it happens, it can be very serious. Acting quickly can save lives, which is why it's so important for mothers and families to know the signs and feel prepared. The next question is, what do nurses and doctors actually do if someone has PPH? The first step is usually a fundal massage. That means gently but firmly pressing on the belly to help the uterus tighten. Medications like oxytocin are often given to help stop the bleeding. In some cases, IV fluids or a blood transfusion are needed. Very rarely, surgery may be required. The good news is that with quick action, most women recover well. And Professor Damo will be speaking on this later on. And I just wanted to highlight some research that I've been doing on why this is such an important issue in Canada right now. In a 2024 study, they found that emergency nurses don't always have the same training and tools as maternity nurses when it comes to PPH. That's especially important in rural or remote areas, where sometimes the emergency nurse may be the only health professional available. The study recommends giving all emergency nurses more training and clear guidelines, so mothers everywhere get safe, consistent care. We will now be taking a short break where afterwards we will be joined by Professor Bruno, who will be speaking on the risk factors of postpartum hemorrhage. Now we are going to shift gears a bit and talk about why PPH happens with Professor Bruno. What actually puts someone at higher risk? Professor Joseph, you recently reviewed a major study on this, right?
Yeah, that's right. I took a look at a study that was published in the Lancet by Yunus et al. In 2025. It's one of the largest studies ever as it reviews 327 studies from around the world to figure out what makes postpartum hemorrhage more likely.
Wow, that's a huge amount of data. So what did they find? Who's most at risk?
So they grouped the risk factors into strong, moderate, and weak categories. The strongest risks were things like low iron or anemia in the birthing person, a previous postpartum hemorrhage, placenta previa, that's when the placenta covers part of the cervix, a cesarean birth, multiple pregnancies, and a macrosomic baby, which is when the baby is greater than 4,000 grams. These all add stress on the uterus and make it work harder to contract after birth. Moderate risks include obesity, preeclampsia, which is high blood pressure while pregnant, gestational diabetes, and polyhydramnios, which is too much amniotic fluid. Weak risk factors are things such as induced labor, instrumental delivery, like the use of a vacuum or forceps, and some medications or health conditions. What's really interesting is that the research also showed that not attending regular prenatal care increases risks. So,
Mhm.
by simply showing up to your appointments, it can be one of the most powerful ways to prevent complications, as it allows for better screening and checkups throughout pregnancy.
Oh, okay. That's really helpful, and it sounds like many of those risks can be managed or reduced with the right care. Can you tell us about some prevention strategies that nurses and families should know?
Absolutely. Prevention starts before birth. Treating anemia early, encouraging balanced nutrition, and planning births for people with known risk factors are very important as it helps the staff stay on the same page and recognize when risks are present. There are also natural protective factors. The study found that skin to skin contact and early breastfeeding can reduce the risk of postpartum hemorrhage but by a great amount. This is because they triggered the release of oxytocin naturally. So something as simple as holding your baby close right after birth can make a real difference.
Now let's welcome Professor Damo. He's going to walk us through how postpartum hemorrhage can be prevented using different medications and nursing care. We'll also learn some easy ways families can stay safe after giving birth. To start us off, Professor Damo, can postpartum hemorrhage happen after both vaginal and C-section births?
Hey Pius, yes it can, but it's more common after a C-section. During surgery, the uterus takes longer to tighten and heal, which can cause more bleeding. That's why us nurses and doctors should work quickly after birth to help the uterus contract and stop bleeding.
And how do healthcare workers help with that?
That's a very good question. Right after the baby is born, we give a medication called oxytocin, usually within the first minute. It helps the uterus squeeze and stop the bleeding. There's also another medication called carbetocin, which lasts longer. I did some research, and a 2025 study by Majed and colleagues looked at over 3,600 women who had C-sections. They found both medicines were safe, but carbetocin lowered the need for extra doses and blood transfusions. For vaginal births, oxytocin still works really well and is the gold standard for almost everywhere in Canada.
Oh, and if that doesn't work right away, what's next though?
Sure. Next, things would include another medication called misoprostol or ergometrine to help the uterus tighten. The blood pressure should be monitored closely with this drug and is not used for those with high blood pressure. Nurses can also gently rub the top of the uterus called a fundal massage to help it tighten.
And what can parents do at home to stay safe?
Parents at home should watch for danger signs like soaking a pad in less than an hour, passing large clots, or feeling dizzy or weak. If you mothers experience any of these, you should get help right away.
And what about people in rural or smaller communities?
So, in those areas, it's very important to have medicines like oxytocins and carbetocin to be readily available. Culturally safe care means listening to families, explaining things clearly, and respecting their traditions. Everyone deserves the same quality care no matter where they live.
Mm. And so what's the big takeaway here?
Postpartum hemorrhage is often preventable. We should give medicines quickly, watch for warning signs, and act fast if bleeding increases.
Thank you, Professor Damo. Joining us now is Professor Thind, who's been researching the management of the third stage of labor. That's a time right after the baby is born when the placenta is delivered. So, Professor Thind, I know you reviewed an article by Begley and colleagues from 2019. Can you start by telling us a bit about what the research looked at?
Yeah, bias, of course. The article I focus on is called Bagley and Colleagues, of course, and that is a study comparing two approaches that deliver the placenta. One is active management and one is expected management, and how each one affects the risk of postpartum hemorrhage. And this review involved nearly 9,000 women in hospitals across several countries. And it's a really solid piece of evidence because they did use a very strict method that just combined data and evaluated how reliable all the results are.
Oh, okay. What are the main ways care providers manage this stage of labor safely?
Well, that's a great question. Well, during this stage of labor, at the time right after the baby is born, there are two main approaches: active management and expected management. Like I said before, the active management, the care team gives medication like oxytocin right after the main delivery, and then clamps and cuts the cord and gently helps the placenta come out. And this helps the uterus contract and significantly reduces the bleeding. Whereas in expected management, the placenta is delivered naturally without medication or traction. While it can work out well for some, it generally carries a much higher chance of postpartum hemorrhage. And most Canadian hospitals do use active management because it is proven to reduce blood loss and prevent complications while keeping mothers safer overall.
That makes sense, and it sounds like nurses play a big part in this process. What are some key things nurses focus on during and after the stage?
Absolutely. Well, nurses are at the center of prevention. We're the ones who administer the medications, monitor uterine tone and bleeding, and respond quickly if the hemorrhage does begin. And just as important is the education and communication, which is to make sure that the birthing person understands what's happening, feels involved in decisions, and knows that early actions like breastfeeding and skin to skin contact also help the uterus contract naturally. And culturally safe and respectful care matters too, because every family does have different beliefs and preferences around their birth, and part of our job is to combine the evidence based practice with respect for those choices so that care stays both safe and meaningful.
That's an excellent point. Prevention isn't just about medication. It's about teamwork and communication. Thank you for being on this podcast, Professor Finn. And that concludes our podcast. Thank you, listeners, for listening in with us. A huge shout out to Professor Damo, Professor Bruno, and Professor Thin for coming on to this podcast. And I'll be linking the brochure in the subject link. And please do reach out if you have any more questions, and we'll answer them in the next podcast.